I'm at the airport on my way to a hotel for a business meeting. This business meeting is very important for my company's future. I've been busting my butt preparing for this meeting, doing research on the client and getting all the documents in order. But then my boss, Mr. Johnson, drops a bombshell on me. I forgot about you because you have such a weak presence. Can you believe it? He's telling me there's no plane ticket for me. My other boss, Mr. Smith, is just standing there laughing. I can't believe this. They've treated me like crap before, but I've always just grit my teeth and worked hard. But this is taking it too far. Little do they know, they're about to face hell. My name is Hank Turner, and I'm 28 years old. I currently work in the sales department of a major manufacturer. When people think of sales, they imagine a bunch of sociable people. But I've never been good at socializing. As a kid, I was always hiding behind my mom or grandpa. The reason I became so bad at dealing with people is because of my childhood environment. I never had a father growing up, so it was just me, my mom, and my grandpa. Because of that, my classmates would constantly tease me, saying your family must be poor because you don't have a dad. That made me extremely averse to interacting with others. Whenever I came home crying after being teased, my grandpa would yell at me, "Why are you crying over something like that? Toughen up." Hearing my grandpa's angry voice made me retreat even further into my shell. My grandpa was very strict, especially when it came to discipline. Maybe it was because he wanted me to be strong since I didn't have a father, but it was hard on me. But when I was struggling with whether to go to college, my grandpa said something kind to me. "Don't worry about the money. Just choose the path you want to take." He said that with a gentle smile. I was surprised to hear such kind words from my strict grandfather, but it made me happy. I followed his advice and went to college to study business. I had a very fulfilling time there, and I was able to get a job at my top choice company, a major manufacturer. I owe it all to my grandpa for giving me that push. I spent 6 great years in the General Affairs Department after being assigned there. My coworkers and bosses were all kind to me, and the friendly atmosphere let me do my job without any issues. In General Affairs, there were lots of opportunities for me to use what I learned in college. I was hoping to keep getting promoted there, but then, out of nowhere, I got transferred. I had never caused any problems and had been getting decent results. I couldn't understand why they suddenly decided to transfer me now. And of all places, they sent me to the sales department. Sales is the one area I'm worst at, but I had no choice but to follow orders. Reluctantly, I showed up for my first day in the sales department. I dragged my feet as I made my way there. I'm extremely bad at communicating with people. Can I really cut it in sales? My heart was filled with anxiety. There was one more thing I was worried about. I heard the department head and section chief in sales had bad reputations. But I told myself it was just a rumor and that I'd be fine. However, my anxiety only grew as I entered the sales department office. The General Affairs Department had a warm, friendly atmosphere, but the sales department felt prickly somehow. Phones were ringing off the hook all over the floor, and I could hear hectic voices coming from every direction. I stood there dumbfounded. Then, a tough-looking guy called out to me, "Hey, are you Turner, the new transfer? What are you doing just standing there? Can you really handle sales after coming from General Affairs?" This was Mr. Smith. I remembered his face well from when he barged into the General Affairs Department before. Every time Mr. Smith came to General Affairs to complain about the power going out or not having enough supplies, he'd mock us General Affairs employees, calling us jerk. When I timidly introduced myself, Mr. Smith burst out laughing. "The General Affairs Department is just a bunch of useless baggage. I bet you're incompetent too." Mr. Smith was clearly looking down on me. I was furious. How could he decide I was incompetent before I even started working? Everyone in the office was looking at me with pity. Then, Mr. Johnson approached us. "Just because you've never done sales doesn't mean I'll go easy on you. Give it your all to meet your quota. Depending on your results, you might get the axe." Mr. Johnson was known as a drill sergeant in the sales department. He would transfer or fire subordinates he didn't like on a whim. He was a constant topic of conversation in the General Affairs Department too. At the time, I listened thinking it was someone else's problem. I never imagined I'd end up being his subordinate. Both Mr. Smith and Mr. Johnson were just like the rumors said. I replied in a small voice, still in shock. Then Mr. Johnson snapped at me again. Hey, speak up when you answer me. I can't hear you at all. I'm sorry. I rushed to my assigned desk like I was running away. For now, I'd do my best at work so I didn't get yelled at by Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith. I tried to psych myself up to work hard, but I had never done sales before. It was a completely unknown world. When I was at a total loss, the senior employee next to me, Mr. Davis, showed me how to do the job. Mr. Davis had the top sales record in the department and worked from early morning to late at night. He wasn't that much older than me, but his way of thinking was mature and reliable. At first, stick with me as my assistant so you can learn the ropes, Mr. Davis said with a smile. And so began my grueling life as a salesman. Mr. Davis not only taught me the ins and outs of sales, but also encouraged me to do research on each client beforehand. Doing research helps you understand what the client is looking for. I took notes on everything Mr. Davis taught me and desperately tried to apply it to my own sales. About a month into this routine, Mr. Smith approached me with a demonic expression. Turner, it's unacceptable that you haven't closed a single deal this month. Are you just stealing a paycheck? I'm sorry. I was thinking of focusing on learning about sales this month. Mr. Smith clicked his tongue loudly. I don't want to hear your excuses. If you don't close a single deal next month, you are fired. What? I froze at Mr. Smith's words. Fired? I've been working so hard because I want to keep working at this company. I can't get fired. If you don't want to get canned, you better bring in some contracts. Useless slackers need to work harder. As Mr. Smith yelled at me, Mr. Johnson joined in from behind. The sales guys are working hundreds of times harder than you. We can have you working like you did in general affairs. If you don't like it, quit. I'll work even harder than before. My body trembled with anger, but I desperately held it back. It's not like I'm goofing off. I'm trying my hardest to do my job. I'll show Mr. Smith and Mr. Johnson what I'm made of, no matter what. I vowed that in my heart. From then on, I devoted all my time to sales, working through lunch and overtime almost every day. Because of that, I started closing one deal after another. I'm hanging on by the skin of my teeth. For now. Turner, you closed 2 deals. That's amazing. Mr. Davis acknowledged my hard work too. For a while there I didn't know what would happen, but I started having smooth sailing every day. But even so, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith's attitudes toward me didn't change. If anything, it felt like they were being harsher. Just what about me bothers them so much? Then one day, the sales department had its monthly morning assembly. Every month at this assembly, the previous month's sales results are announced. Mr. Johnson started the announcement, looking very reluctant. This month's top sales performers are Davis and Turner. Everyone turned to look at me all at once. They probably never imagined that I, a former general affairs employee, would get the top sales numbers. They all applauded. Mr. Davis next to me was as happy as if it were his own achievement. I'm glad I worked so hard. To be honest, ever since being assigned to sales, there were days I felt it was tough, coming home late with no time for a personal life. But that toughness was blown away by how happy I felt. However, Mr. Johnson's next words knocked me down again. Turner, don't get cocky. This was all just luck, not your skill. I'm giving you a special quota by the end of this month. If you can't meet it, you are fired for sure this time. What the heck is this quota just for me? I can't accept that none of the other subordinates have a quota like this. Mr. Johnson clearly wants to fire me no matter what. As I frowned, Mr. Smith snickered at me. What? You saying you can't do it? I wasn't happy about it, but I immediately replied, I'll do it. I have no choice but to do it. At the same time, I got anxious about what kind of quota it would be. Then Mr. Johnson spoke loudly to me with a laugh. Your quota is to land $500,000 in contracts in 1 month. If you can't, you are fired. I couldn't believe my ears. Everyone in the office had disbelieving looks too. There's no way I can get a contract that big. It was clear Mr. Johnson was setting me up to fail. If I say I can't do it here, I'll lose. and losing is the last thing I want to do. Understood. I said that and returned to my desk. I've overcome difficulties with hard work before. I can do this. I told myself that and started researching potential clients. But time just kept passing by unproductively. As the end of the month approached, I started to panic. I had managed to close a few deals this month, but it was far from the $500,000 target. It's already the end of the month. You sure you're gonna be okay? Maybe you should start packing up your things. Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith seemed to think I couldn't meet the quota, smirking at me every time they saw me. I was honestly anxious too, but I was convinced I could overcome it, because I had a certain strategy. And so I made a phone call to a certain place. On the last day of the fateful month, I handed a contract to Mr. Johnson. He had a look of disbelief on his face. Is this really a contract you landed? Mr. Johnson was astonished, his body trembling. Mr. Smith next to him kept looking at my face over and over. If this is true, it's amazing. We did it, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Smith was overjoyed. Hearing Mr. Smith's words, Mr. Johnson stood up with the contract in hand and went off somewhere. Seeing Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith's surprise, my coworkers approached me, wondering what was going on. What happened? Mr. Davis asked Mr. Smith, looking puzzled. Turner got a $50 million contract with Incorporation. This is unprecedented even for our company. What? Mr. Davis and the other coworkers gave me a big round of applause and congratulated me. This means I avoided getting fired, right? When I said that, Mr. Smith nodded quietly with a strained expression. I felt truly relieved. That's right. I had succeeded in landing a contract with Incorporation, the industry leader. I had heard from Mr. Davis before that getting a contract with Incorporation would be the best case scenario. So I had pinned my hopes on a contract with Incorporation. I had desperately researched Incorporation for the sales pitch, prepared documents, and even gave a presentation. My efforts paid off and I was able to secure the contract without issue. And for $50 million no less. They say hard work never betrays you, and I really felt that was true. After a while, Mr. Johnson returned to the sales department. When I reported this to the CEO, he was thrilled. Turner, I think it was a fluke, but good job. A fluke. He doesn't seem to realize how much I busted my ass to land this contract. But I avoided getting fired, so I'm relieved for now. After closing the $50 million contract, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith's harsh treatment of me drastically decreased. After a few peaceful days, I was called in by the department head. Mr. Johnson glared at me with his arms crossed. Incorporation wants to move forward with discussions now that the contract is in place. So next weekend, we're going to meet with them. You're coming with us, so make sure you get the meeting documents in order. The company's future is riding on this. Mr. Smith also spoke loudly. The real business talks are finally starting. I threw myself into preparing the documents, half excited and half anxious. We finally landed the contract, so I wanted to give it my all until the very end. I was desperate with those feelings. Here, have this. Mr. Davis brought me a cup of coffee as I skipped lunch to work on the documents. Thank you so much. I gratefully accepted the coffee. Watching you reminds me of myself as a new hire. It's important not to forget that initial passion. Good luck with the meeting. I know you can do it, Turner. Mr. Davis smiled as he said that. Taking Mr. Davis' words to heart, I made my final push. Just as Mr. Davis said, I'm sure the meeting will go well too. I had no doubt about that. But what awaited me after this was hell. On the day of the big meeting, I woke up earlier than usual. The meeting location required taking a plane, so we were all supposed to meet at the airport and fly there together. The airport was pretty far from my house, so I wanted to leave extra early just in case. Before leaving the house, I thoroughly checked my work bag. It would be a disaster if I forgot important meeting documents. After confirming I had everything, I headed to the airport. I arrived at the airport, but Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith weren't there yet. I guess I arrived way too early. Thinking that, I started double-checking the meeting documents. At the meeting, I'm planning to explain our company's products in detail so we can do business going forward. I prepared the documents so I can handle any questions, and I have it all memorized too. I'm sure it'll be fine. As I was thinking that, I saw Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith walking toward me from the front. I stood up and bowed my head to them. "You're fully prepared, right?" Mr. Johnson asked pompously with a frown. "Yes, I'm completely prepared," I replied confidently. For some reason, Mr. Smith was excited. "It's awesome that we get to fly business class today." Well, of course, this meeting has the company's future on the line. It's only natural we'd fly business class, right? Well, business class, huh? Having never sat in such luxurious seats before, I was a little excited. "All right, it's time. Let's head to the boarding gate." At Mr. Johnson's signal, we headed for the boarding gate. It was already bustling with passengers about to board the plane. We're finally getting on the plane. As I was thinking that, Mr. Johnson started handing plane tickets to Mr. Smith. But after finishing handing them out, he just headed straight for the boarding gate. "Huh? Don't I get one?" Finding it strange, I asked, what about mine?" But then Mr. Johnson dropped a shocking line. "Oh yeah, I forgot you were here too since you have such a weak presence. There's no ticket for you." "What?" Seeing my surprised face, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith burst out laughing. Leaving me standing there dumbfounded, the two of them boarded the plane. "I worked so hard for this meeting. Isn't this way too cruel?" I cried in frustration, sadness, and shame. I had desperately worked, wanting to be acknowledged by Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith, but it was all for nothing. I will never forgive those two. Anger coursed through my body like electricity. I don't even care what happens anymore. I headed to a certain place. 2 hours passed after that. Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith have probably arrived at the destination by now. As I was thinking that, my smartphone started ringing incessantly. This screen showed it was Mr. Smith, but since I had a pretty good guess as to why he was calling, I ignored it. They had the nerve to call me now after leaving me behind. What are they thinking? Mr. Smith's calls kept coming in relentlessly, over and over. Enough already. Give it a rest. With no other choice, I decided to pick up. Then I heard Mr. Smith's panic voice on the other end. "Turner, it's an emergency. Get to the meeting location right now." What's he saying at this point? My anger had reached its peak. No way. Why do I have to go? Wasn't it you guys who left me behind in the first place? Mr. Smith flinched a little at my pointed words. "Turner, please. The chairman and the rep are saying they won't have the meeting without you here." As I hesitated to respond, I heard the client company's chairman's voice from the background. "Where's my grandson?" "Huh?" I said. "Where's my grandson?" The client's chairman seemed to be expressing his anger like a raging fire. "Turner is the chairman's grandson." "That's right." I could hear Mr. Johnson's surprised voice too. Hearing that exchange, Mr. Smith's voice started trembling. Don't tell me, Turner, you're the grandson of Incorporation's chairman." I sighed. "That's right. So what? Can't you just tell them I got sick and couldn't make it or something?" "Wait a minute." I hung up the phone. "That's right. My grandfather is actually the founder and chairman of Incorporation." It sounds unbelievable, but although I knew my grandfather worked, I didn't know he was the chairman of a big company until I started working. My grandfather purposely didn't tell me. Maybe that was my grandfather's kindness, so I wouldn't become spoiled. But in the spring of my first year working, my grandfather came out to me. "I may be chairman now, but it took a lot of effort to get here. Hank, you should also give your all to what you can do." My grandfather's words sunk deep into my heart. And just as my grandfather said, I had been working my hardest. When I get transferred to sales, my grandfather was the first person I consulted. I thought my experienced grandfather could give me some advice. But seeing my serious face, my grandfather burst out laughing. "Hank, that's a chance for you to grow. No matter where you get transferred, you can overcome it if you have the motivation." I see. I was impressed by my grandfather's words. And so I kept working hard and my sales performance improved. But when Mr. Johnson told me to bring in $500,000 in contracts by the end of the month, I found myself in a desperate situation. That's when an idea popped into my head. To get a contract with my grandfather's company, Incorporation. But knowing my grandfather, even if I'm his grandson, he wouldn't agree to a contract just because I asked him to. So I had called my grandfather and asked him to take a look at my sales pitch and sign a contract if he liked it. I did everything I could. From research to preparing documents, I did all the usual sales prep I would do for any other company and took on that day. On the day of the sales pitch, I confidently explained the products to my grandfather. My grandfather listened quietly with his arms crossed, not saying a word. And as soon as I finished my pitch, he gave me a big round of applause. You have a solid understanding of your own company's products, and you properly researched what my company is looking for too. You worked hard. All right, let's sign a contract. Hearing my grandfather's words, tears welled up. It was the moment my efforts bore fruit. And that's how I was able to land a $50 million contract with Incorporation and develop it into a business meeting. About 30 minutes after Mr. Smith's last call, I got an incoming call from Mr. Johnson this time. I knew it, he called. Since I had predicted a call would come, I wasn't surprised. There's no way they could wrap up the meeting without me there. I picked up the phone, acting nonchalant. Were you able to have the meeting? Mr. Johnson seemed agitated and didn't seem to hear my voice. This is bad. I asked Mr. Johnson again. What's wrong? You were able to have the meeting, right? Mr. Johnson's voice was quavering as he fell into a panic. We somehow got them to let us have the meeting, but the meeting documents aren't with us. You have them, don't you? Bring them here right now. To put it simply, it seems Mr. Johnson had forgotten to get the meeting documents from me, so he didn't have them on hand and couldn't proceed with the meeting. In the first place, if they had the meeting details and product information memorized, they shouldn't need documents. But I bet neither Mr. Johnson nor Mr. Smith compiled these meeting documents, and since they always leave things to others, they probably don't have any of the meeting content in their heads. It was tens of minutes after I was left behind at the airport that they realized this fact. But it was a good chance to show them what happens without me. I see. Please figure it out yourselves. What did you say? If you don't come right now, you're fired. What is this guy saying? Anger welled up from the depths of my stomach. In the first place, wasn't it you who set me up and left me at the airport, Mr. Johnson? Stop using me only when it's convenient for you. When I said that, Mr. Johnson erupted in anger. I'm your boss. What's wrong with me using you as I please? Don't tell me you're getting cocky because you're the grandson of Incorporation's chairman, but you're my subordinate right now. Don't get too full of yourself. What's he saying so high and mighty? When did I ever get cocky? A boss who can't even have a meeting without me is no boss of mine. As I was thinking that, I heard my grandfather's loud voice from the other end of the phone. Is the meeting starting yet? How long do I have to sit here like this? My grandfather seemed irritated with the meeting that was taking a while to start. Yes, we'll start the meeting right away. Mr. Johnson, let's begin. Yeah. Prompted by my grandfather, the meeting seemed to have started. Mr. Johnson was in such a rush that he forgot to hang up, so the call stayed connected. I could hear the whole sloppy meeting between Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith over the phone. About the product you've agreed to purchase this time. It just has great performance, that's all. Other companies are raving about it too. I was dumbfounded by the meeting content that even an amateur could handle. It was plain as day that Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith hadn't prepared anything for the meeting. It was truly embarrassing to listen to. As expected, my grandfather raised his voice. That doesn't tell me anything at all. The sales rep also seemed confused, but asked Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith for a more detailed product explanation. Well, like I said, this product is a great one that appeals to everyone. When you press this button, it does this. It's not working. It's completely useless. These people know nothing about their own company's products. I couldn't take it anymore. Then my grandfather, who couldn't stand watching, exploded in anger. You left my grandson behind, saying he has a weak presence, but you can't even have a proper meeting without him, can you? How do you know that, Chairman? How do I know? I heard everything from my grandson, who's listening there. What? Everyone looked toward the door all at once. I poked my head out from there and greeted. Then Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith looked at me like they'd seen a ghost. Actually, right after being left at the airport, I immediately got a plane ticket and followed after them. I thought I couldn't let my grandfather down after he made this important meeting opportunity for me. When I arrived at the airport, I immediately explained everything to my grandfather. My grandfather was furious, but decided to use this chance to see if Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith could handle the meeting by themselves. But as expected, it became clear that the two of them couldn't have a proper meeting without me there. My grandfather raised his voice. "You have no idea what my company is looking for, do you? What did you even come here for? And not even understanding your own products is just appalling to hear." Mr. Johnson's face went pale as he trembled. This is all Turner's fault. Everyone there froze. Is this guy serious? If so, he's really an idiot. I had reached my limit. I had to say something to him or I wouldn't be satisfied. But before I could speak, my grandfather let his anger show like a raging fire. "Are you out of your mind? You are here for a meeting, but you didn't prepare at all, left everything to your subordinate grandson, and on top of that, you left him at the airport. That's not how a boss should act." Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith were both at a loss for words at my grandfather's angry voice and fell silent. My grandfather looked at the two of them and continued. "When my grandson pitched to me, I felt your company's products were excellent, but you who are selling them are the worst kind of people. I don't want to do business with people like you. Consider this deal off." "What? Please don't say that. Forgive us for the sake of your important grandson." Mr. Johnson suddenly brought up my name. I was appalled hearing that. Then Mr. Smith started saying even more unbelievable things. "Developing subordinates is also part of our job. That's why we entrusted this work to Turner. Thanks to that, I think Turner has become quite capable at his job. For your grandson's sake, won't you please continue the contract?" I was taken aback by the nerve of what he was saying. But these two getting to do whatever they want ends now. I spoke up loudly. "Grandpa, there's no need to forgive them. I've decided to quit the company." "What? No way. I never want to work at a company with rotten bosses again. I made that decision the moment I was left behind at the airport." Both Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith were shocked to hear my words. "Turner, don't say that. Let's work hard together again." Mr. Johnson changed his attitude completely and approached me, but it was too late. My grandfather burst out laughing. "That's right. That's a good idea. Your sales skills have greatly improved. Come work at my company." "Grandpa, thank you. I'll do my best." I was surprised to hear those words come out of my grandfather's mouth, but I was happy. Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith collapsed to their knees on the spot and were at a loss for the longest time. After that, my grandfather formally voided the contract and I resigned from the company. I have no regrets since I worked as hard as I could. In the process of voiding the contract, my grandfather reported Mr. Johnson and Mr. Smith's horrible treatment of their subordinates to the CEO. The CEO was furious and handed down demotions and transfers to the two of them. The two were sent to a rural branch office and I hear they're currently working as regular employees. Knowing how prideful they are, I don't think they'll do well no matter where they go. But I hope they at least try not to cause trouble for those around them. And I, who quit the company, got a fresh start as a salesman at an corporation where my grandfather is chairman. There are many challenges, but I'm doing my best, thinking of it as training. Besides, I have a strong ally right by my side, so I'm not afraid of anything. Turner, let's go make some sales." "That's right. It's Mr. Davis who took care of me at my previous company. When I quit the company, I invited Mr. Davis to come work with me. Mr. Davis had no hesitation and immediately took me up on my offer to start working together. At my previous company, I struggled without having good bosses. But Turner's to that struggle, I'm able to do sales like this now. I'm going to live each day to the fullest."